In October of 1944, a steelworker in Pittsburgh would sit down at his kitchen table just before dawn. The plate in front of him held 3 eggs fried in bacon grease, a 1/4 pound of thick-cut bacon, 2 slabs of buttered toast, a scoop of fried potatoes glistening in lard, and a glass of whole, unpasteurized milk. His doctor would not have raised an eyebrow. That was October 1944. By today, every single thing on that plate would carry a warning from at least one major medical association. This is the story of 10 breakfasts that built the men who poured the steel, mined the coal, and came home from the war. We are going to walk through them one at a time and look honestly at what modern medicine got right and what it may have gotten wrong. Pittsburgh, 1944. The average American man working in heavy industry burns somewhere between 4,000 and 6,000 calories a day. Coal miners ran even higher than that, lumberjacks higher still. And the sedentary office worker, by today's standards, basically did not exist. That is the first thing to understand before we judge any of these breakfasts. The men eating them were not commuting 40 minutes to a desk. They were swinging hammers, hauling pallets, walking fields, working forges, and stocking holds. The food on the table was fuel for the work. The second thing to understand is the food economy itself. Ration books had been issued in May of 1942. Sugar was rationed. Coffee was rationed for a year and a half. Meat, butter, and cheese all had stamp values. So while the breakfasts we are about to look at sound enormous to a modern ear, many of them stretch scarce ingredients with cheaper, more old-fashioned ones. Lard, cornmeal, organ meat, and salt pork were the foundations. All of them had been on American tables for 200 years. What changed wasn't really the food. What changed was the work, the science, and the supply chain. We will come back to that. For now, let's start the countdown. Number 10. Cured liver oil. This one is not really a breakfast item. It is the breakfast ritual that bookended the meal. Across the United States and the United Kingdom, kids and adults alike were lined up for a daily tablespoon of dark, fishy oil, often before they were allowed to eat anything else. In Britain, the Ministry of Food distributed it free of charge during the war years. In the United States, it was a fixture of pediatric care and naval rations. The reason was simple. Vitamin D deficiency had been a serious public health problem in the early 20th century. Rickets was common in industrial cities where soot blocked sunlight and children spent long hours indoors. Cod liver oil delivered vitamin D and vitamin A in concentrated doses. And by the 1930s, the connection between the oil and stronger bones was well established. By 1944, giving your son a spoonful before school was simply what responsible parents did. Today, you can still buy cod liver oil. Modern medical advice has narrowed considerably. The concern is twofold. First, modern fish stocks carry mercury and polychlorinated biphenyls that people in the 1940s did not face at the same scale. Second, concentrated vitamin A is now understood to be toxic at high doses, particularly during pregnancy. Most pediatricians now recommend a vitamin D supplement instead, taken in measured drops. The irony is that vitamin D deficiency is back. Office workers, indoor workers, and people in higher latitudes are now routinely diagnosed with low vitamin D, the same condition cod liver oil was given to prevent. Your grandfather's daily spoonful, in other words, was solving a problem that we have quietly recreated. This decision seemed small at the time. It wasn't. The next item is the bowl that sat next to that spoon. It is the one most people forget started its life as a hot, full-fat, full-cream affair, before low-fat marketing rewrote the recipe entirely. Number 9. Hot cereals with butter and heavy cream. In a 1944 American kitchen, the cereal aisle as we know it did not exist. Cold cereals were available. Kellogg's Corn Flakes had been around since 1906, Wheaties since 1924. But for working men in the 1940s, the breakfast bowl was usually hot. Cream of wheat, wheatina, mapo, steel-cut oats, and farina were the standards. These cereals were boiled in a pot on the stove for 15 minutes, often longer, and served in a soup bowl rather than a cereal bowl. What went on top is the part that has been quietly erased. A tablespoon of butter melted into the hot cereal, a quarter cup of heavy cream poured around the edges, a spoonful of brown sugar or molasses across the top. In some homes, a fried egg sat in the middle of the bowl. The end result was somewhere between 2 and 3 times the calorie count of a modern breakfast cereal serving, with double the fat and a respectable amount of protein. By the late 1970s, the dietary fat hypothesis had taken hold of American medicine. Saturated fat was identified as the primary driver of heart disease, and any breakfast that combined butter, cream, and sugar in a single bowl was singled out as a problem. The American Heart Association issued increasingly strict guidance through the 1980s and the 1990s. The bowl emptied of cream. The butter disappeared. Skim milk replaced whole. The heavy cream pitcher left the table. The interesting twist is that the science has moved since then. Major studies published in the 2010s, including a 2014 meta-analysis in the Annals of Internal Medicine, found the link between saturated fat and heart disease was less clear than originally claimed. The United States Dietary Guidelines lifted the cap on dietary cholesterol in 2015. None of this means your grandfather's bowl is now on the cardiology recommended list. But the medical posture toward it has softened in a way that would surprise the doctors of 1995. That softening becomes more visible with the next item. Cornbread, butter, and molasses were on a similar journey, and they reveal something interesting about how guidelines actually move. Number 8. Cornbread with butter and blackstrap molasses. Walk into a kitchen in rural Tennessee, North Carolina, or southern Illinois in 1944, and the breakfast table almost certainly held a pan of cornbread. It had usually been baked the night before in a cast iron skillet, in some cases the same skillet that had fried the bacon. The bottom crust carried bacon fat. The top split open under a thumb. A man would cut a wedge, smear it with cold butter, and pour blackstrap molasses across the top until the plate ran dark. This was the cheap breakfast. Cornmeal cost a fraction of wheat flour, and during sugar rationing, molasses was the affordable sweetener of choice. Blackstrap molasses, the dark and bitter byproduct of sugar refining, was sold for pennies. It also happened to be one of the few sweet foods of the era that contained meaningful iron, calcium, magnesium, and potassium. Rural doctors in the 1940s sometimes prescribed it directly to anemic patients. Modern dietary guidelines have not been kind to this combination. A single tablespoon of molasses contains roughly 15 grams of sugar. A pat of butter on a wedge of cornbread brings the saturated fat into play. And the cornmeal itself, while less refined than white flour, has a glycemic index high enough to spike blood sugar in a way that diabetes specialists now warn against. The American Diabetes Association puts cornbread with molasses firmly in the occasional column, not the daily one. But there is a piece of context that often gets dropped. Type 2 diabetes was rare in 1944. The Centers for Disease Control did not begin tracking it as a public health crisis until decades later. The same breakfast that today contributes to a population with high diabetes rates was, in a population that walked 12 miles a day, and worked physical jobs, a perfectly functional source of energy and minerals. The math has not changed. The math just no longer adds up the same way. The next item moves from cornbread to the side dish that almost always sat next to it. It is where the cooking fat itself becomes part of the story. Number 7. Hash browns and home fries fried in bacon grease. There was a tin can on the back of nearly every 1940s American stove. A coffee can, a Crisco can, sometimes a repurposed lard tin. Inside sat a thick, off-white substance with a slightly cloudy top. Bacon grease. The morning's drippings were poured off, strained, saved, and reused for days, weeks, or until the can was full. When it came time for hash browns or sliced potatoes, the cook reached for that can. A heaping spoonful went into the cast iron pan. The potatoes hit the hot fat with a hiss that defined breakfast in farmhouses, mining camps, lumber camps, and military mess halls. The flavor it produced is famously hard to replicate with modern oils. There is a reason your grandfather's hash browns tasted different from yours. The fat itself was different. Modern dietary advice on this practice is almost uniformly negative. The first concern is saturated fat. The second concern is one most home cooks never think about. Reused cooking fats oxidize. Repeated heating creates trans fats and aldehyde compounds. And the longer fat is reused, the higher those numbers climb. By the time a tin of bacon grease is sat on the back of the stove for 3 weeks, getting topped up and reheated daily, the chemistry inside it is no longer the same as the fresh bacon fat that started it. This was not understood in 1944. The trans fat connection was not established until the late 1980s, and the practice of saving and reusing cooking fat continued in many homes well into the 1970s. By the 1990s, vegetable oils, sunflower, soybean, and corn had displaced the bacon grease tin in most American kitchens. Food authorities celebrated this shift as a major public health win. What the next decade then revealed was that those same vegetable oils, when industrially processed and used repeatedly in restaurant fryers, produced their own set of problems. The bacon grease tin had been replaced, but the underlying chemistry had not been solved. That sets us up for one of the most divisive items on this list. The next breakfast meat is one many Americans today have never tasted, even though their great-grandparents ate it every Sunday. Number 6. Scrapple, liver mush, and the awful breakfast. In the Pennsylvania Dutch country, in upstate New York, and across the Carolinas, breakfast in 1944 routinely included a sliced and pan-fried loaf made from organ meat, cornmeal, and pork trimmings. In Pennsylvania, it was called scrapple. In North Carolina, it was liver mush, sometimes known as liver pudding. Both came from the same impulse. Nothing from the pig was wasted. A traditional scrapple loaf included pork liver, heart, snouts, and other trimmings, simmered with cornmeal and buckwheat flour, packed into a loaf pan, chilled overnight, then sliced and fried in butter or lard for breakfast. It was eaten with eggs, with apple butter, with maple syrup, with ketchup, and in some homes with all of those at once. A working man in Lancaster County might eat it 5 mornings a week. The argument against this breakfast in modern medicine is more layered than the others on this list. The first point is sodium. Commercial scrapple today carries between 400 and 600 milligrams of sodium per slice. The second point is saturated fat from the pork trimmings. The third, and the one that has changed the most, is heavy metals. Modern industrial pork production allows trace amounts of cadmium and other heavy metals to accumulate in liver tissue. The 1944 farm pig, fed table scraps and pasture, carried a different load. Almost every doctor today will tell a patient with hypertension or kidney concerns to skip Scrapple entirely. That advice is medically sound. What the same conversation often misses is that Scrapple was a thrift food by design. It came from a culture that did not waste protein and did not waste fat. The cooking style was excessive. The underlying philosophy was the opposite. That philosophy of nothing wasted runs through the next item too. Once you understand that grease was not garbage and trim was not trash, the next breakfast on the list, the one that combined both into a single ladle, makes a lot more sense. If you are enjoying this walk through the breakfast table of the 1940s, hit subscribe. We cover this kind of mid-century American history every week. Now, back to the countdown. Number 5. Sausage, gravy, and biscuits. There is a corridor of American food culture that runs from West Virginia through Kentucky and Tennessee, down into Georgia and Alabama, and west across the Ozarks. In the 1940s, that corridor woke up to a plate of biscuits, split open and drowned in sausage gravy. The gravy was a roux, pork sausage browned in a cast iron pan, the rendered fat left behind, white flour stirred in to make a paste, then milk, salt, and a heavy hit of black pepper. The sausage went back in. The whole thing thickened. The biscuits got buried. A typical full-size serving in 1944 might run 1,200 calories before the eggs came out. The sausage was usually fresh, often made on the same farm or by a butcher up the road. The biscuits used either lard or bacon grease as the fat. Buttermilk, left over from butter making, gave them their lift. Cardiologists today look at this dish and see almost a complete summary of what current dietary guidance is built around. It has refined white flour, saturated fat from pork sausage, more saturated fat from lard or bacon grease in the biscuits, high sodium from the sausage seasoning, and a roux made entirely of fat and refined starch. Some dishes violate 2 or 3 modern guidelines. Sausage gravy and biscuits violate roughly 7, depending on which version you cook. What the modern critique tends to forget is the calorie burn on the other side of the plate. A coal miner in 1944 in Logan County, West Virginia, would walk a mile underground, swing a pick for 10 hours, and walk a mile back. The 1,200-calorie breakfast was not the problem. That same plate, served to a desk worker today, absolutely is. Same dish. Different lives. That gap between the food and the life around it is going to keep showing up. It shows up loudest with the next item on the list, where the cooking fat itself, demonized for half a century, is now quietly being rehabilitated by parts of the medical community. Number 4. Buttermilk pancakes fried in lard. The 1944 pancake was a different animal from today's pancake. The batter was usually buttermilk-based, made with leftover buttermilk from churning. The leavening was baking soda, reacting with the buttermilk's acid. The fat in the pan was lard, often homemade, occasionally bacon grease, almost never vegetable oil. Real butter in a quarter-pound stick sat on the table. Real maple syrup, where you could get it, came from the spring run on a New England woodlot. In the South, sorghum syrup or cane syrup did the work instead. The whole thing got eaten on a Saturday morning, after the eggs and bacon had already been cleared. It was the second course. For most of the late 20th century, this was the dish dietitians used as a teaching example of what not to eat. White flour, saturated fat, sugar, cooked in animal fat, stacked 4 high. The verdict was unanimous, and the verdict was harsh. But this is the item where the medical conversation has shifted the most quietly. Lard, in particular, has had a slow rehabilitation. Studies published since 2010 have shown that pasture-raised lard is roughly 45% monounsaturated fat, the same category as olive oil. It has a higher vitamin D content than almost any other cooking fat. And modern research on the so-called diet heart hypothesis has been less conclusive than the 1980s consensus claimed. Several studies have called the foundational research into question, including the reanalysis of the Sydney Diet Heart Study, published in 2013. This does not mean lard pancakes are a recommended breakfast. They are still, by current guidelines, an occasional indulgence rather than a daily food. But the contempt that defined the 1990s nutrition conversation has been replaced by something closer to careful interest. Whether that interest reaches the next item is another question. Organ meat, which sits at number 3, has had a much rougher ride. The case for and against eating it for breakfast is still being debated in serious medical journals. Number 3. Liver and onions for breakfast. For a working family in 1944, calf or beef, liver was usually the cheapest cut at the butcher counter. It was also the densest. A 4-ounce serving of beef liver delivered more iron than a pound of beef chuck, more vitamin A than almost any other animal product, and a substantial dose of B12 and folate. In an era when vitamin supplementation was rare and expensive, liver was a delivery vehicle. In some northeastern households, liver and onions appeared on the breakfast plate twice a week. The preparation was straightforward. Slice the liver thin. Soak it in milk for an hour to mellow the iron flavor. Dredge it in seasoned flour. Pan-fry it in butter or bacon fat with sliced yellow onions until the onions were nearly burned and the liver was just past pink. Eat it with eggs, toast, and coffee. The case against liver in modern dietary guidance is specific. The first concern is vitamin A toxicity. A single 4-ounce serving of beef liver contains roughly 6 times the daily recommended intake of preformed vitamin A. In high or sustained doses, that can cause liver damage, bone density loss, and birth defects. The second concern is heavy metals, the same conversation that came up with Scrapple. The third is saturated fat and cholesterol, though both have softened in current advice. Most physicians today recommend organ meat only occasionally, somewhere between once a month and once a week, never daily. That is a long step down from the 1944 norm of twice a week. The interesting wrinkle is that the broader medical conversation about iron deficiency, particularly in women and in older adults, has come back around. Iron deficiency anemia is now one of the most commonly diagnosed nutritional deficiencies in the developed world. The food that solved that problem in 1944 still solves it. We have just decided the cost is higher than we want to pay on a regular basis. The cost calculation is even sharper for the next item, which depends on a method of food preservation that almost no American household uses anymore. Number 2. Salt pork and fatback. Before reliable refrigeration, salt pork was the meat that did not spoil. Slabs of pork belly packed in salt kept for months in a cellar or a smokehouse. Fatback, a cousin cut from along the spine, did the same. In rural America in 1944, both were standard. Both showed up at breakfast. A few thin slices of salt pork, fried until the edges curled and the fat rendered, were eaten alongside eggs, with cornbread on the side, and the rendered fat became the cooking medium for everything else on the stove. For a logger in coastal Maine, a hand at a Texas ranch, or a sharecropper in Mississippi, salt pork was breakfast protein and breakfast fat at the same time. It was also breakfast salt. A 4-ounce serving could contain over 2,000 milligrams of sodium, more than the entire daily recommended intake under current guidelines. That sodium load is where modern medicine draws the hardest line. The link between sodium intake and hypertension, while still actively studied, is well established for sensitive populations, and rates of high blood pressure have climbed dramatically since the mid-20th century. Add to that the curing process itself, which involves nitrates and nitrites, both now linked to elevated colon cancer risk in some studies. Add to that the fact that almost no one today does the kind of physical work that would burn off those calories. The case against salt pork as a daily breakfast meat today is, by current standards, airtight. The case for understanding why our great-grandparents ate it is harder to dismiss. Without it, winters in the rural North were lean. The same food that today raises blood pressure, in 1944, prevented hunger. That tension between then and now reaches its loudest version with the final item on the list. It is the breakfast that, more than any other, defined the American working man in the middle of the 20th century, and the one that today's cardiologists are most likely to circle on a chart and tell you to leave behind. Number 1. Steak and eggs. This was the breakfast of the working man, not the rich man, the working man. In 1944, beef was rationed, but cheaper cuts, round steak, chuck steak, sirloin tip, and bottom round were still the default morning protein for anyone who could get them. A 1/4-inch thick steak, often a cut that today would be labeled as stew meat, was salted and peppered, slapped into a hot cast iron pan with a pat of butter or a spoonful of beef tallow, and cooked for 90 seconds on each side. 2 or 3 eggs went in next, fried in the same pan in the same fat, with the rendered juices from the steak running into the whites. A man would eat this with a slice of cornbread or 2 pieces of toast, a glass of whole milk, and a black coffee. The plate ran upward of 1,500 calories. The protein content was roughly 70 grams. The saturated fat content was roughly 30 grams. The cholesterol was roughly 600 milligrams. By 1980, dietary standards treated every one of those numbers as a problem. The cholesterol number alone was double the cap. By current standards, the picture has shifted. The 2015 United States Dietary Guidelines removed the cap on dietary cholesterol entirely because dietary cholesterol does not meaningfully raise blood cholesterol in most people. The protein number is now considered an asset rather than excess. The saturated fat number is still flagged, but the absolute prohibition that defined late 20th century cardiology has loosened. What modern doctors still raise eyebrows at is the cumulative pattern. Steak for breakfast every morning, year after year, in the body of a sedentary office worker is not the same proposition as steak for breakfast in the body of a man about to spend 10 hours laying railroad ties. This brings us full circle. The food on the 1944 plate has not changed in any meaningful way. What has changed is the body sitting at the table, the work that body is about to do, the supply chain that produced the food, and the medical understanding of how the food behaves once it gets inside us, which on some questions has reversed direction more than once. What the body received in 1944 was, in many cases, exactly what the body needed. The same plate, served today to a different body doing different work, is a different proposition entirely. That is the conversation worth having. There is a tendency when we look back at how our grandfathers ate to fall into one of 2 camps. The first camp says they were doing it right, and modern medicine has ruined what was working. The second camp says they were eating themselves into the ground, and only the heart attack rates of the 1950s and 60s tell the truth. The honest answer is somewhere in the middle, and it is quieter than either of those positions, Some of what was on the 1944 breakfast table has held up. Eggs are no longer the villain they were called for 40 years. Lard has been quietly rehabilitated. The case against saturated fat is more nuanced than the American Heart Association's 1961 guidance claimed. Cod liver oil's underlying purpose, vitamin D delivery, has come back into clinical focus. Some of it has not. Salt pork, Scrapple, and reused bacon grease tins are not making a comeback in any cardiology guideline. Daily organ meat is still flagged for vitamin A toxicity. Sausage gravy and biscuits, eaten by a desk worker, is a different equation than the same dish eaten by a coal miner. The biggest change of the last 80 years was never really about the food at all. The men who ate these breakfasts in 1944 were burning 4,000 to 6,000 calories a day in jobs that no longer exist for most of us. The medical guidance that followed was an attempt to adapt to that disappearing world. Sometimes it got the science right. Sometimes it didn't. The plate is the same. We are the variable. Cream of wheat is still on the shelf at most grocery stores. Cod liver oil is back, marketed as an omega-3 supplement. Steak and eggs are on diner menus from coast to coast. None of these were ever truly banned. They simply moved from the daily plate to the occasional one. Whether that is progress or loss or simply change is a question better answered alone at the kitchen table. Thanks for watching. If this is the kind of mid-century history you want more of, the channel covers a new piece of 1940s American life every week. There is another video on screen now if you want to keep going.